So Anthony Russo, how are you, man?
I'm doing well. Yeah, thanks for having me. It's good to catch up with you again, and it feels like we're just going to have a conversation like we always do.
I know, it feels like old times. It's funny, you don't see people for a couple of years, and you're like, is it going to be awkward for 5 minutes, or are we going to have difficulty talking? But obviously that wasn't the case, since we've kept in touch over the years, and I do appreciate you coming on and definitely taking a leap of faith. I know everybody that sits here is like, oh, I don't know what it's like to be in a podcast or what this is going to be like, but thanks for taking a chance, man.
No, thanks for having me, and I will say I'm really impressed. I wasn't quite sure what to expect coming in on a podcast, and this is legit.
Well, you can see why when I saw this, I actually tell a story. As soon as we walked by this and they said, oh, by the way, we have a podcast studio, it was like record stopped, like where do I sign up for the space? But yeah, this is not something that a lot of people get an opportunity to have access to, and so I feel very fortunate that they do this here.
No, it's great.
Well, so let's get into it, man. Before we're going to talk stop loss. Of course, we're going to talk direct writer and Voya and all that stuff. I'd love to take a couple minutes just for the audience to get to know you, though. So, Anthony Russo, I got to ask, do you still have the CrossFit gym in the garage, man?
We have the CrossFit gym in the garage. I still work out in the garage gym. For me to call it CrossFit would be an insult to CrossFit
fair enough.
days. But
yes. Did you ever get that Rogue machine that folded up against the wall, the squat rack or pull-up rack? or whatever?
I just have the regular rack.
Okay.
So it doesn't fold up, but it's that version of that. So it takes up 2 stalls, and we pretty much have everything you can imagine in there that a CrossFit gym has. We have 3 boxes. We have that treadmill, that assault. That true form.
Oh, yeah.
We have an assault bike. We have a rower. I have 600 pounds of bumpers. I have kettlebells that go to 5 pounds to 70 pounds.
Are you running classes in there, man? You got some neighbors coming over and doing WODs?
We do. I don't do WODs anymore.
Okay.
I think I stopped that at like 43, but that was a few years ago. But my wife, she'll do CG classes, but she'll do it remotely. Obviously, that started up after COVID and stuff like that. But no, I just get up. Nobody wants to work out the time of day I work out.
Are you like a 4:30 guy, 5 a.m., something like that?
5 a.m., 5:15.
Yep.
I've been moving a little bit later lately. I've kind of taken your kick where I'll do some reading in the morning.
Yeah.
So I'll wake up around 5, get a cup of coffee. I'll read for about 30, 45 minutes.
Let the caffeine kick in.
Kick in, and then myself and my 2 workout buddies, which are my 2 labradoodles, we'll go out and work out. So.
They keep you kind of honest, make sure you stay on task.
One guy, Nash, will literally sit behind me and just sit there and bark at me periodically for a treat. Tucker will lay there, stare at me, and then drop a ball periodically that I got to throw a ball for him. So
that's funny.
Yeah,
that's a good workout buddies, though. They keep you company, man. I don't have the the pleasure of having something in my garage yet. I think one day my wife and I both talk about just the convenience of either having a room or the garage dedicated to it. But I try to stay fit as well. But I think having just the ability to walk out into another room and do your workout and come back in, there's almost no excuse at that point to stay fit, right?
In theory,
yeah. There's also, I don't feel like it today.
I can do it later.
Yeah, I hear you, man. But so, I want to talk somewhat about your career, if you don't mind, for a second. You spent the majority of your career in the carrier world, right?
Pretty much all
your career, okay.
All my career in the carrier world since out of 8 or 9 months of getting out of college, starting off on the finance side. But all of it has been driven primarily around insurance and a lot of it around employee benefits. How I kind of got into the employee benefits world when I got out of college doing the financial planning route, I had a group rep call on me from Paul Revere.
Okay.
His name was actually Terry Burnett, and I met him during one of my internships, and in being a 23-year-old kid, a 23-year-old.
That's still a kid. 23 is a kid, for sure.
I got to be careful these days.
Yeah.
It's all different. But I considered myself a kid at that time, trying to give people advice to either buy insurance or do investments. It was a difficult route. Mm-hmm. Terry introduced me to in New York State. They have statutory DBL.
Okay.
Statutory disability law. And he kind of showed me what to do to call on employers to kind of get into that group world to meet the owners to sell them individual disability.
I see.
So that started in 97, and then in 99 I joined Unum, and I've been in the carrier world since.
So yeah, group rep for Unum then. Were you doing life disability, all answer the lines, or what were you selling at that time?
Yeah, at that time I actually went in on the executive benefit route.
Okay.
So it was what the executive benefit route was for the top portion of the population that would have capped out on regular group benefits. Unum still does a good job of being able to make sure that they cover the top of the top inside the group. So I started there and then went down the traditional group route,
Okay.
Large case voluntary or supplemental health route, large case group rep route, management, then got into stop loss, and it's been all carrier, kind of all products across the board. So I'd say pretty diverse.
Yeah, I was just saying, you've had stops at some of the biggest, of course, being at Voya today, at Sun Life prior to that, at Unum before that. Did you have any idea, though, that this was going to be your career path coming out of school? It sounds like maybe, but not necessarily.
Not really.
Okay.
It was, you and I were kind of talking about this beforehand. I went in, initially when I was a freshman, you can go back to a Seinfeld episode where Costanza always wanted to be an architect.
Okay.
Growing up, I wanted to be an architect. And I did play college sports. You and I talked about this in the past. You played college sports. Well, none of the schools recruited me had architecture. So I was like, the closest thing would be engineering. Not even close, but I was a high school kid. So I was lucky enough to get recruited by University of Rochester, got the privilege to go to that university, and initially they had a great engineering program. So I started off my first semester in chemical engineering because I liked chemistry, liked engineering, I was good at math, let me try that. That lasted about 2 semesters. And I was like, that's not the route I'm going down.
Was it just too difficult? You didn't like the subject? What happened there?
It was too tough.
Too tough. Okay.
It wasn't panning out how I thought I was going to pan out. So in that with athletics, and I really liked business, and they didn't have a business school, but they had economics, which I really enjoyed because it was more of a mathematical business degree. And there was different things that you can do with it, one being finance and one we were talking about on actuarial. You can kind of go down that path. So I got introduced to that, but during athletics, there was a lot of companies that would come in and talk to us, and one of those would Unum. You had Northwestern Mutual on the other insurance side because they liked the athletes. They liked hiring from private universities, especially in the Northeast. So I got introduced to it that way. But I can say honestly, growing up, I never envisioned myself, selling insurance.
Well, me neither, right? And I think it was a funny. I graduated, I think, business administration. I had an exercise science degree as well, but I had no idea what I wanted to do. So for the first 3 months, I'm living with grandma because my parents are like, well, your sister has your room now, so you can't come back. And so I'm living with grandma, trying to find a job, scouring the internet. It was still early stages of, I don't even know if LinkedIn was around at that point, but I was applying to anything and everything, and probably stuff I should have never applied to because there's no way I would have been qualified to do it. But Liberty Mutual was one of those. You kind of mentioned Unum, and I forgot the other, Northwestern Mutual would hire kids out of school. Well, Liberty Mutual was the same, but they hired me as a claims adjuster. So it's like you have decent grades, right? You have no experience. Go up to Boston for 10 days. We'll train you how to be an insurance adjuster, and then good luck. Yeah. And so it's funny. Like I didn't like the insurance adjustment world, but that's how I started. And it's been almost 15 years now, and I'm still in the insurance world. So it sucks you in, man, and doesn't let you go.
It does.
Well, so that's obviously the background. So let's bring it to up to present day, if you don't mind. Obviously, you work with Voya. You've been with Voya for 4 years now, correct?
Just coming on 4 years, yeah.
Cool. And so you are. I know your title was a sentence long. What was the title again?
It's the official title is Executive Regional Manager for the South Region of Health Benefits.
Okay.
So it's what my office that I manage is Dallas, Houston, and Phoenix. So kind of all territories inside of that. And my particular division focuses on the employee benefits side. Okay. We call it the health side.
The health side.
The reason why is Voya right now if you look at our total value picture of what we look at, we call health and wealth. We're kind of trying to tie everything together. But we're responsible for stop loss, life and disability, FMLA, ADA, and then our supplemental health products.
Supplemental health, what would qualify under
hospital indemnity, critical illness, accident.
Was it work side? Is that what people refer to?
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah, but ours, we kind of more, to give people perspective, we call it supplemental health.
Supplemental health, okay.
Because it ties so closely to the health insurance and high deductible plans and so forth. And 2 years ago, or recently, maybe a year and a half ago, we also launched HSAs.
Oh, I didn't know that. Okay.
To kind of tie into that, just once again, bringing together that health and wealth.
Well, because Voya is also known for the 401k space as well, right? Or retirement space.
Yep. On our wealth side, which
wealth,
is our
the wealth and health. I'm getting it now. Yeah.
It's we have a lot of different programs over there, but yes, our goal on that side is to be the most recognizable 401k or retirement company in the U.S. So they're definitely we do really well in 401k and everything around that. There's a whole different world over there that I'm still learning.
Yeah, it's like when I talk to benefits brokers, and then you'll ask about the PNC side of the shop, where those things are so compartmentalized. I have friends that don't know the insurance industry as well, and they're like, "Oh, well, you don't know about individual life insurance?" I'm like, "No, I have no clue.
Idea.
Go talk to somebody else, or Medicare, or that's completely not the same thing." But people just lump insurance into one thing. Yeah. But I think the one thing that I want to ask you about in specific that ties it into the self-funded with Spencer theme, if you will, is I had Jeff Petty on here a few episodes back, and Jeff obviously is at Pace Underwriters. They're an MGU. And so we spent a lot of the conversation talking about, well, what's an MGU? What's the value proposition? Where do they fit? You obviously are the inverse of that, or at least, I don't know if not necessarily opposite, but you guys are a direct writer of stop loss. So could you take a second to define that for the audience?
Sure. As a direct writer, like we carry all our own risks. So it's all on our own paper. It doesn't mean that we don't necessarily have reinsurance behind us for particular levels, but that decision sits on our paper singly. So if we insure a company and if we insure up to a certain max as it goes through that claim, we're the only individual that'll say yay or nay to that claim.
Okay. So that gives you, would you call that the pen or authority, or sometimes referred to as?
It gives us the full liability of making that decision.
Yeah.
So there's not, where MGUs definitely have their spots. They're good areas to fit into, but depending on risk levels, they could have to spread that risk out over different reinsurers that might carry different paper from what they're kind of underwriting up front. We carry that whole risk.
Well, yeah, and that's what, Jeff did a great job, because Jeff came from it came from HCC. Obviously, he was at a big direct writer as well. So did a really good job of objectively laying out the value proposition, which I think is fair, right? It's an MGU is not for everybody. Voya is probably not for every case size as well. So presumably, I know from what I know as well as the background, Voya has been predominantly thought of as a larger case underwriter. Is that correct?
Yeah, over time, it wasn't one of the things that we went in and kind of planned it out. It just kind of happened over time.
Okay.
And it's really just for the fact that our average spec tends to be a little bit larger. It's right around that 350 to 400K spec.
Okay.
Only about 30% of our groups utilize aggregate. So just we tend to be a pretty heavy spec.
I was going to say that's a pretty low percentage.
It is. It's one of those things where ultimately we're at a position now that we're really kind of trying to go back down market some.
Okay.
We'd really like, our average spec to probably sit around 250, 300.
Okay.
So we are making sure that we're focusing more on regional brokers. And because traditionally we've really spent a lot of our time with panels or COEs or some of the larger consulting houses, just because they tended to play in that higher space.
Sure. So you said originally, or not necessarily intent, but you guys obviously ended up gravitating towards that larger space due to the relationships, but you're driving potentially back down. Does that mean going after the middle market type brokers, the regional brokers like you mentioned, and they tend to have business that's in that lower range of the spec levels, right?
Yeah, they tend to be. I mean, we're one of the things that I really like about Voya, or who we are, is we kind of know what we're good at and what we're not good at. We're very good at where we offer, but it tends to be in that larger corporation. But we'll write down the 200 lives. It's really making sure that our services kind of match up with what they're looking for.
Okay.
And a lot of times some of those services tend to, larger companies tend to kind of value our value prop. And one of those is being a direct writer, having the say on each individual claim, giving them some expertise around their plan docs, and also our cost containment provisions that we have.
Well, and what is kind of the broader value proposition? We defined a direct writer is you write on your own paper. It's ReliaStar paper, is that?
Yeah, ReliaStar paper, yeah.
So you write on your own paper. Of course, there still might be some reinsurance behind the scenes, but you guys are ultimately making the claims decisions and those sorts of things. So that's a direct writer, but there's always you get to pick from the BUCAs of the world. Everybody understands what a BUCA, and they offer stop loss. You got the MGUs, and then the direct writer positions itself, I presume, somewhere in the middle of those two as well. So what are the things that as a direct writer you tend to advocate for yourself in the market?
One, obviously leaving that, we get to make the decision on the claim and so forth. But number two, especially when we call it unbundling. I mean, some of your training, you went through that. We're obviously a direct writer, independent writer. We don't carry our own ASO plans and so forth. So it's a second set of eyes. So claim adjudication, we'll review that claim, even if it's with a TPA or if they're using a TPA network, it could be a third set of eyes versus a second set of eyes. Mm-hmm. And we also have our own set of terms of cost containment provisions that are voluntary, but if an employer wants to take advantage of those or get into the claims as they're going downstream or start to kick into that large claim report, 25%, 50%, we can recognize IC9, IC10 codes and start to identify things that we're seeing off of our block that might be of concern and get involved a little earlier.
Yeah.
So is there modality around dialysis? Is there a large specialty pharmacy that we might have a relationship with that we can come in and then provide some insight or provide, if it's once again voluntary, but if a company or claimant wants to go down that path, we can put them in touch with Center of Excellences around certain cares, modality of care in U.S., outside of U.S. So we just have some expertise around that, where it's sometimes if you're not a direct writer or if you don't have those resources, because we've been doing this for 30-some years.
How big is the Voya block, or at least the public?
It's around 1.1 billion.
1.1, okay.
Yeah, so I think it's the
that's stop loss only.
Stop loss only, yeah. Stop loss only, and that, I think, is the third largest.
Okay.
Last time we looked, third or fourth largest independent direct writer in the U.S., so depending how you look at it. So we have some expertise there. We have volume that we can look at, and we can also look at trends. But one of our biggest value props is, we pay claims, and we do it exponentially quick, so that's one of the things we take pride in. So.
Well, yeah, and that's what I love, of course, obviously coming from the Sun Life, similar value proposition, slightly different, but they're advocating for a lot of the same things. The thing that I objectively have felt like I appreciated the most about a direct writer's position versus a BUCA's position is you can only really make money off the stop loss, right? So your incentives to keep costs down were in line with the employer's incentive to drive down costs, because if you don't control them, then you're paying big reimbursements, and guess what? There's big renewals on the other side of that as well. So I felt like there was proper alignment of outcomes there with a direct writer. MGU probably, the same as well. But that was what I felt like I could do a relatively decent job as a rep. Positioning versus staying with a Blue Cross or United or Cigna. Again, different value proposition, not denigrating what they do. Nope. It's just a different buyer, different reason why they're purchasing stop loss for me versus that source. Yeah.
And I think that was one of the reasons why we tended to go up market too, because as you continue to go up market, the unbundling factor, third parties, direct writers kind of become more prevalent, it seems like.
Yeah, and you're doing probably less time convincing of the employer that what a direct writer is, right? It's just more about, what makes me different versus Sun Life pricing and those sorts of things. So, obviously you guys are big, financially stable. I mean, you're one of the few, I think, stop loss carriers, a Sun and a Symetra is similar in the fact that they offer some of those other ancillary benefits and voluntary as well. You guys are unique, though, that your reps are selling both, correct?
Yeah, we actually utilize a generalist model.
Okay.
And what we consider that in when we bring, when our average tenure of rep is, I think on my team, the youngest or experience-wise is 15 years.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so but by doing that, though, it's like a large case group life and group DI rep. It's a specialty stop loss rep and an expert in supplemental benefits. Okay. So they're doing all three. We do have support around them on specialty cases. We have a gentleman in our office who I consider one of the best in the industry. His name is Fred Rodenbach on our supplemental health.
I've heard of Fred, yeah.
One of the best in the industry. And then we have an extremely talented team. And then we also have an individual that'll help us out with underwriting with cases over 5,000 lives on the life and DI. But my rep, when they go in and work with a producer or consultant, that's the person working with them for all product lines. So.
Well, I could see, obviously, from a broker perspective, it's nice to have one singular point of contact for those lines of coverage, right? With the generalist model, you might run potentially the risk that they're better at one line of coverage or the other, but presumably with a average tenure of 15 years, most people are probably well-versed in everything. And I think also the cohesion between the sales process, if you're quoting all those lines of coverage in one fell swoop, means there's a little bit more that connects that entire sales process together. So it makes sense.
It does. And also, too, just to protect against people, not all markets are created equal. Mm-hmm. So they're one of my reps that has an affinity more towards stop loss. His market is probably closer to stop loss heavy.
Sure.
Where another one of my reps is more identifying with the life, DI, and supplemental health, well, their market's probably a little bit more driven heavily based off of those products.
Well, that's fair, right? I mean, we all gravitate towards the things that are interesting to us, right? But then you have to make sure, obviously, you're still, I'm sure you guys are incentivizing properly to make sure they're selling all those things. But, of course, we'll focus a little bit more specifically on the stop loss. And I love talking about this. I think the one thing that you and I talked about as a potential nice micro subject matter would be the clinical side of this. Mm-hmm. We didn't get too deep with Jeff on that, but I love hearing about what's coming down the pike. What are these big, maybe prescription medications, specialty medications that are somebody like you or the position that Voya is in with a credible block of business, you guys are able to see 2-3 years down the line and maybe price for those things. So generally speaking, what are the kind of things that you're seeing right now?
Well, the big thing now that we're hearing quite a bit about is the cell and gene therapy treatments.
Okay.
And just the research around that. We actually just did a seminar, or we called it Voya University, for about 200 producers that were invited in. And then we had an expert panel come on and kind of talk about what they're seeing in the marketplace around the next, what we view as kind of that large ticket item kind of going down that path. Because it seems like every couple of years, there's that different area that you're kind of looking out for. A few years ago, HAE,
when I was still selling, HAE was the big one that everybody was talking about.
And then there were some, massive drugs or pharmaceuticals that were being price tagged along with that, where, that's starting to tame down a little bit. Still pretty pricey, but not anything that's really not some of the price tags that we've seen. We were looking at sometimes exclusions, hereditary angioedema, right? HAE. I forgot, what is the medication that was at the time? I put you on the spot. Don't worry about it, man. I wouldn't be able to pronounce it.
I remember it was, I want to say it was an 800, $1 million, $1.2 million. I can't remember exactly what the price point was.
Yeah, it was real sensitive. It was about $250,000 a shot.
Okay.
And it really just kind of, depending on when and where it was given, it could vary widely, but we saw claims anywhere from $1 million to, upwards to $3-4 million.
Okay.
And there's some that were just completely just out of the realm.
Yeah, no, I've heard the rumors of the $20+ million claim, which, obviously, I think every time somebody retells the story, the claim gets bigger, right? It's one of those, like the fish grows after you tell the story. But I think it's also important for folks that aren't as well versed in the stop loss world to understand, there's the known risk, right? And there's the unknown risk. And you guys are obviously pricing in the manual for some of that unknown risk, like the $1 million drug that pops up out of nowhere that you couldn't have possibly predicted. So, what is the next kind of, is there a certain condition or certain drug that now you're hearing more buzz about in the market?
I think everybody heard about Zolgensma.
Yes.
It's about a year and a half or 2 years ago. And that's for a really small percentage. It's spinal muscular dystrophy.
Okay.
And it's really designed, which is one of the really good things I think came out of the ACA, pluses and minuses to that, but one of them was the amount of money and research is being done with some of the diseases that are out there, because there's a way at least to pay off back for pharmaceutical companies up front. Mm-hmm. And the downside of that is that there's going to be new drugs that are coming out, or new pharmaceuticals, or new treatments, cell treatments, transplant treatments, that are going to be pretty expensive. Mm-hmm. Zolgensma was one of the first kind of like gene therapy ones that we saw. And that is for a horrible disease for younger children that are just being born, FDA approved, under 2. They're starting to look at that. But just the shot, the one-time shot of that was around $2.2 million, not counting any of the hospital costs, the doctor's costs, the post-treatment, pre-treatment, the medical versus the pharmaceutical charges. So that could run up to about 3.5.
Okay.
So there's
$3.5 million. Okay.
Yeah, so it works in most cases, where at least there's a positive recuperation rate from this. So it's something that's interesting. So now we had this expert panel come in and kind of talk about, like that next wave coming.
Yeah, you always have to be
through.
looking 2-3 years out, right?
Yeah, so right now they're seeing within 12 and 24 months, there's about 7 CAR T, which is more of the cell injection and transfusions or transplants, you want to call it, to help cure and help fight some of these diseases. One that's on the I forget the name of it, but it's for sickle cell, and they're kind of seeing that fall into the same Zolgensma type price tag. But right now, across the next 24 months, if you take cell and gene therapy, they're looking at about 40 different drugs or specialty medicines that are going to be coming out for either gene or cell therapy. So, and that's once again just for the pharmaceutical part of that. So the science of moving forward to be able to to help people out in regards to some of these awful diseases is fantastic. It's just there's a price tag to that.
Yeah.
So making sure that companies that you're going to see much more just questions around, I think, population health, but some of these you're not really going to be able to kind of.
There's not really any preventative measures, right? I mean, if somebody's born with one of these conditions, or let's say an employee gets hired and their child, the dependent, is on the plan, and all of a sudden they come on with this particular condition. I mean, it's unpredictable. It's almost impossible to predict. How do you guys do it though from a corporate perspective? Let's say a new drug is on the market, it's FDA approved, it cures X. Is that something immediately would be then a covered condition, or is there some sort of measure that has to go in place that we're now adding this to a list of things we cover and it's no longer experimental? How does that work?
As a direct writer, we really look at their plan doc. And one of the things, and this is, I think you asked me and just kind of peeking at the questions before we were coming here, what do you want people to kind of take away from this?
Yeah.
And if I would say anything to anybody working with companies or any company that's self-insured, is to make sure that their plan doc is up to date, written for and with the understanding of a lot of these new treatments coming out, how do they want them to be handled? Because if it's FDA approved, that, and if it's approved in their plan doc, then odds are that's going to get paid.
Okay.
So, and that's what we're here for, and to be able to take them down. But in some of these really large treatments, they're also being looked at as the second. They're not always the third or last resort anymore. These are getting moved up the path because they're so effective. So the idea of having one of those land in your population could be pretty. It's increasing.
Yes.
There was a survey that we asked those 200 producers and consultants that were on that call when we were talking about the cell and gene therapy panel, and it was, do you have any customers or groups that you're working with right now that you have bumped into this in your group? So obviously the producer answered or consultant answered it, so they're working with multiple organizations, but 30% of the population that was on that training or seminar said yes.
Okay.
They are dealing with one or multiple of their groups. So it's definitely out there. So.
Well, that's what obviously as a direct writer too. When something like this happens, you're on the hook, right? There's not necessarily any recourse if, like you said, if it's approved in the plan doc, it's an FDA approved drug. How do you account for if the majority of the business is written at 1/1 and something gets FDA approved in August of that year? You just accept it and then price for it for a renewal season next year, or how would that work?
It's obviously manuals are driven based off of overall population and overall population health, depending on industry, depending on age, and all those different things that go into it. Actuarial stuff that I don't need to talk about. But it really kind of depends. Either there's certain things that are going to be one-time, impacts, and in some of these therapies, they're going to be more one-time impacts. I can't really speak for our underwriters too much. But we kind of look at them as, you got to kind of pool those large claims. And stop loss is something, it's not, as a carrier, you can't be faint. You got to kind of all be in on stop loss.
Yes.
And that's the reason why, we've been doing it for so long, and there's very few companies, probably a handful that have been doing it for as long as we have, because a lot of people jump into it see these large claims
Yeah.
and then jump right back out there like that wasn't any fun.
Yeah.
But part of that is just knowing that there's going to be peaks and valleys of this.
Sure.
So the idea is to have a customer that we have partners with, working with our producers, consultants, and to work through those. If it's a one-time hit and we know it's going away, yes, we'll probably want to recoup some of that, but to the full extent, that's unrealistic.
Yeah.
It's just the luck of the draw, luck of the large numbers.
Well, yeah, and then you obviously spread the risk over, 1,000 clients or how many clients you guys have. Of course, if you have 15, 20, 25 hits spread over a block that's big enough, right, you can smooth out some of those fluctuations, yeah. But still, I think that's an important message for people to understand when buying stop loss, right? You want to work with a partner, Voya or somebody else, that in that four corners of the contract that everybody always talks about, that partner is going to step up to the plate and pay a claim no matter how big it is. They can pay a claim, whether it's $5 million or $25 million if those actually exist anymore. But it's something that I don't think a lot of employers necessarily understand when purchasing stop loss is worst case scenario, is that company going to be there for you, right?
Correct.
Yeah, and I think people also tend to think of, insurance, they didn't pay anything on my no stop loss claims last year. I had a 0% loss ratio. Why am I getting an increase? It's not just you for one. And that's also, you had a great year. What happens next year when that's not the case, right? So there's got to be a smoothing effect on a micro and a macro level, I think, as well.
Correct.
Yeah. So that's cool. So that's a high dollar claim stuff. I love hearing about that. Let's go more of a macro view on the last year, because everybody knows obviously what happened last year with claims. What were you guys seeing on the, sort of that downturn with COVID, and then maybe what's going to be the other side of that in the coming years?
That's something, and I think most carriers look back at last year, and the overall large spec hits were down.
Okay.
Aggregate seemed like it was down also, but there are some concerns coming out of that, and especially when you're looking at overall medical spend, and if I think there's carriers out there, or there's an undertone that we could be concerned with. Were those cancers that could have got caught earlier? Were they caught on well visits? Were people with hypertension or were leading down high cholesterol? Were they seeing their doctor when everything was shut down? There is some concern about that, and there's discussion, not necessarily with Voya, but just the industry of like, how is that going to play out over next year and the year after? I know that there's certain underwriting philosophies now of like underwriting aggregate coverage. How much of 2020 and early 21 is credible information coming through on that data that they're seeing. Because obviously aggregate was pretty easy to calc in the past. You had your overall spend, you had your corridor and so forth. But if that overall spend was down significantly, you can't really utilize that year.
I wonder what the philosophy there is. Do you almost skip over that year in terms of credibility, or you still account for it but weight it less in the overall? We don't have a firm approach on it. It really depends on the experience. Okay. If it's way off, then hey, we need to take a deeper dive into this. If it's within a certain percentage, then maybe we'll throw 5% on it or something like that, just to go down that. And it really depends on their corridor window too. Yeah. So if they're at 115, then obviously that's something we need to be a little bit more careful at versus they're at their 125 corridor. Sure. Yeah, and it makes sense, but I'm curious if that, looking in the crystal ball, if that's correct, right? If we believe a certain percentage of the population delayed or completely ignored certain care or certain screening now, is that, what's the residual effect of that? Is it we're going to see maybe more frequency and more severity because cancers were missed or heart attacks were missed, or maybe some of those warning signs were missed? I guess it's anybody's guess right now, but that's a reasonable assumption, I think, to make, right?
It's a reasonable assumption, and now it's really trying to put the math to it. Yeah. And that's where actuaries make their money. So we'll see how it works out.
Yes, and speaking of actuaries, do you mind for a second, Todd? I know you've got Anthony and I were talking beforehand. Anthony's got a daughter, Reagan, that just graduated from high school and is actually going to study actuarial science. So would you mind sharing, the thought process behind that? Because I think she might be the first person I've ever heard is going to study that in college. So that's pretty interesting.
Yeah, it's one of those things where my daughter, she's got a really good head on her shoulders, and she's been an awesome student. And we've been really lucky, and she's unbelievably self-motivated. I don't think I've ever had to tell her to do her homework.
That's awesome.
Yeah. She's just kind of doing it. Well, she's going to be a freshman at Baylor next year.
Okay.
And one of the things and how she became interested in actuarial science and statistical science going into it was really a class that she took in high school, and it was My Health Money.
Okay.
And that class, she had to pick a major, and this was, I think it was her freshman or sophomore year. She had to pick a major. Then she had and she really did that major based off of what her starting salary was going to be coming out of school.
What's a smart kid though?
I
would have done the same thing, yeah.
But she came down to myself and my beautiful wife Shelly, and she's just like, all right. She kind of rolled her finger around. She's like, what how do I do this? How can I? It seems like we got a pretty good lifestyle. How can I do this? And she actually asked a question. She's like, what did you major in? I was economics. My wife is economics, but she went on to the law school and she was an attorney. So we were a blast at a cocktail party because I was an insurance agent because nobody else could tell the difference, and my wife was an attorney. So like two people you never want to talk to. But my daughter kind of looked at that and she's like, all right, so what can you do with that? And I was like, finance, or you can go down an actuarial route. And she's like, what is actuary? And I was like, well, pretty much everybody in executive level or higher in my organization had some type of actuarial study. Or they're in actuary science and they're pricing and doing all those different things. So she kind of did some research on it, and then she spent more time studying or looking at different careers that she can do with statistical science and actuarial science. And I'm very proud of her. She's starting off, and we all know people change majors,
sure.
But she is definitely going in, and I'm excited. Hopefully she finishes it and she goes through that, because I would love to have somebody in my family actually explain what I do.
That's funny. Yeah, explain it back to you, right? I've been selling it this whole time. I really don't understand it.
Yeah, but not only that, like when you were in it, could Courtney really tell people like what you did?
She could say he sells stop loss insurance, and that was really the extent. I spent some time with her, but the people that just aren't in the industry, right? It's you lose kind of some of the desire to try, because there's so much context you have to give before you even get to what you do that it's like you don't care and I don't care. Let's just leave it at that. Yeah, I sell insurance, right? But that's interesting, right? And I think, did Dad have some influence on that though, the actuarial route?
A little bit.
Okay.
It's one of those where I give advice, and they can take it or not. But right now she really, and she's excited about it, and she's interested about it, and she reads about it quite a bit, and she'll actually come in because obviously working from home pretty heavily now, and she'll hear me on conversations around pricing or different things, or she'll come in and actually ask questions.
That's pretty neat. That's got to make you feel pretty proud, right? Like she's taking an interest in what Dad does.
It is, because now she's going to go and study the numbers behind it, and she's kind of heard the front conversations of what it is. So once
she'll get to have those conversations, if she goes the insurance route, she'll eventually get to butt heads with the sales reps that are trying to get certain pricing, and she gets to be the one like, no, we can't do that. Like, I know you want to sell it, but no, we've got some risk that we're concerned about here.
Yeah, her dream is to one day be the head actuary for the company that I work for, so she can tell me no.
Okay. So you just got to keep working long enough for that to happen, man. But kudos to her. I think that's really cool, right? And it's very rarely do I think people that I hear about, right, go into some sort of insurance related. I know it's not necessarily solely insurance. But it's just fascinating, because as a guy that like you yourself as well stumbled into this and turned it into a career and found out you liked it. It's actually cool to hear some young people have a good head on their shoulders and go, actually, that sounds interesting. Why don't I go do that? Well, good for her, man. We'll get a couple more minutes. We'll wrap it up here. I'd love to hear. I know you mentioned you guys do a lot of the panels and the coalition type business. Could you real quick describe what a panel or a coalition is, and then talk about what that arrangement is like with the agencies that do that?
Yeah, sure. I think this has been, it's an involving perspective of regional and national players, just with how involved that brokers and consultants and teams that are working with these large organizations of what HR team shrinking, more pressure putting on that consultant or producer calling on these organizations, that it's hard for them to be experts or be experts and do all the marketing at the same time. So a lot of these large organizations, the Mercers, the Aons, the Locked-ins, they put together center of excellences, which you call them panel, coalition, so forth. But they're really, they're experts in that particular product, and they do the marketing for those producers or teams that are working with the actual client.
Okay.
So it alleviates the marketing from that particular team, and then they get kind of the final results. They get to dig into the company and the contracts and so forth and move out. But it's taking that part away from them. And especially, it seems like where a lot of these producers having to chase, different organizations for data.
Yep.
I mean, that's one of the biggest, toughest things on our side as a third party of getting the appropriate data to be able to quote effectively without what we call in our industries conservative assumptions.
Okay.
Because if we don't have those answers, then we have to leave that.
You always have to err on the side of caution. Yeah,
right,
absolutely.
Conservative assumption. So we've had good success with them. Mm-hmm. Not everybody's going that path, and that's fine. We also love working with regional brokers and national brokers that don't have the coalition. Mm-hmm. But it's definitely something that's out there that we're seeing more and more of.
Do you think it's just brokers that get to a certain level and maybe realize with the aggregated buying power that they, they can maybe, like you said, you'll have an expert team, right? Or you dedicate a team to that, but there's also maybe you reduce the number of carriers you work with. Maybe there's some contract enhancements, but there's a business decision, of course, that goes along with that as well, correct?
Yeah, I think there's a business decision. I think part of it is not necessarily leverage with an organization, mm-hmm. because, we don't, a customer is a customer, a producer is a producer, a broker is a broker. Mm-hmm. One producer or consultant's not going to get a beneficial treatment on a certain plan versus another one with us. Yeah. I mean, we don't go down that path. We might be able to get some better data from one producer or another, and sometimes from a coalition or sometimes from a direct relationship. But what I will say, it's a business decision on their part, mm-hmm. where are they spending their money? And if my opinion, if Anthony Russo is going to do it, then if I'm a producer or if I'm a consultant, I want to spend my time with my customers that are directly and making sure I'm giving the best advice, mm-hmm. and not marketing.
Yeah.
So me sitting back in my office sending out quotes is not an effective use of my time. So I can see organizations looking at that. I also think it's a liability issue. Some organizations with their E&O and so forth, mm-hmm. if you have people that specialize in that inside your team and marketing that, are they making sure that they're checking all the boxes,
exactly.
that we didn't miss something?
Exactly.
Because the last thing you want is a claim not being paid, especially a significant claim, a $3 million claim, because mm-hmm. somebody forgot to check a box.
Yeah, and I think that's the relative value proposition you hear for doing it in-house in a panel or a coalition, a COE, whatever you want to call it, versus, the external GA market that obviously we both know very well. They're offering somewhat of the offloading or as a consultant in order to outsource, right, some of the liability, but the marketing efforts and the procurement efforts and those sorts of things. So just, obviously I don't want you don't have to say better or worse or preferred, because Voya, I think, like you said, takes a neutral stance, but, understanding the difference in that internal coalition versus that external GA as a partner for marketing. What can you describe about that, or
the thing
things to think about as an agency making that decision?
Yeah, as an agency making that decision, a lot of the times is, do they have the resources? So if they're going to go down that panel or GA route, if that's the decision they're going to go down, they feel like that's the best move for them. A coalition that's set up internally inside your own organization, you have to have scale, mm-hmm. and you have to have dollars for mm-hmm. scale to make that efficient, go down that path. If you look at some of the really good GAs out there, and we have some great ones here in Texas, that they can do that for them. So they can be their coalition or team, and I think you see some of that around our marketplace. So if you have a regional player or a small regional player that might have 3 or 4 producers and an office of like 25 people, for them to kick up a COE, or a center of excellence, that's going to be very expensive and not really advantageous them to do that. Mm-hmm. But if they partner with somebody that's their GA version of a coalition for them, and then they're able to do that and be able to provide them the results, the producer or consultant, they need to be, when we're working with larger organizations, they need to be experts in what they're doing. And they do have that knowledge, and they do have that. But all the backroom stuff on the marketing perspective, it's a great spot for some of those really good GAs to be able to work with.
Yeah, and is there maybe a dollar threshold that you think certain agencies get at premium-wise and they go, oh, I think we're big enough to set this up ourselves? Is it a couple $100 million, you think? Or it may be difficult to say.
Yeah,
right?
I wouldn't know. I mean, unfortunately, I've always been on the carrier side.
Yeah.
So if I spoke to that, I'd probably be completely wrong anyway.
That's right. You could throw numbers out.
Yeah,
you get to be the expert for the day, man. Now, so and I appreciate that, and I think that's all. It's an interesting thing from my perspective, seeing the different distribution channels, having worked for direct writer and then a GA, and then of course there are these coalitions that the brokers set up as well. It's just fascinating. Everybody has interest in stop loss. There's obviously big dollars associated with the premium and some of the compensation as well. But it's just it's interesting seeing what these different agencies are doing to solve the same problem. They're just going about it in slightly different ways. Yeah. Well, so all right, man. Well, so I think that's it. We would cover the future. I mean, anything you kind of cover what you'd want to leave the audience with. But if there's a nice little nugget you want to wrap up with, man, the floor is yours.
Yeah, two quick things there, just to make sure, especially as we're going down, going forward, and just with the future of medicine and cell and gene therapies, just make sure your plan docs are up to date. Just don't take it for granted that you had it three years ago written and somebody proofread it. I mean, these things, they need to be buttoned up and tight, and utilize your partners that you're utilizing with. We'll do some reviews. We have partners that'll do reviews. We won't give advice, but we can review it and just say, hey, these might be a couple holes that might pop up. But there's great partners that are out there. And the next thing is just making sure, if you're going down this route and you're working and you're working with third parties, data is key. And especially as a self-insured customer, that's their data. And making sure that they're able to get that from their ASO carrier, their TPA, to give that third-party writer, direct writer, an MGU, or anybody really a good line of sight on what they can see. Because it's just not for pricing. One of the things that we also can utilize and do, and carriers can do, is that cost containment. We might catch things even before we take them over as a customer, and be able to provide some insight and some helping with some claim management or claim helpfulness within that cost containment, even before they become a customer of ours. So just data is important. Yeah,
I would agree. Data was always my favorite reason to self-fund. Out of the bullet point list of everybody, the positives if you go self-funded, access to data, but also knowing, like you said, it is your data. Sometimes you have to fight a little harder for it, but at the end of the day, it is the employer's data, which you're absolutely right, man. And I appreciate that's a good place to leave it with. So, Anthony, thanks for coming on, man. Thanks for your time. And it was a pleasure seeing you again.
It was great seeing you.
All right, man.
Thanks.